Did you know that you can use system simulation, mocking, and service virtualization to improve your recovery time and recovery point objectives? That practice is called component disaster recovery testing, and I'll tell you all about it. So first of all, a quick refresh. What is disaster recovery? Disaster recovery is your firm's plan to protect its systems and data from disasters to recover quickly and reduce the downtime and losses. Sample disasters like that will include natural catastrophes, cyber attacks, or theft or sabotage. Most companies would be already doing, probably if you have a DR test plan, things like production failover tests, full-scale testing. Some companies would be doing bubble network tests, so isolated rehearsals, and some companies also might employ test environment failover tests like parallel testing. And you can complete your DR test plan by using component DR tests, service simulators such as Traffic Parrot. So the problem we see with many companies is that selected disaster scenarios are not tested, and short and long-term disaster impact, the risks, are not clear due to the lack of the sufficient DR tests. And what we see is that those tests are time consuming and costly to set up. So that's why companies do not run those tests. And the reason for that those tests are so time consuming and costly to set up is that the scope of those DR tests is too large and contains too many systems and risk variables. So the solution here is to divide and conquer and reduce the scope of the DR tests by doing component isolation DR tests with system simulation, also called service virtualization and mocking. So on the left hand side we can see here all components DR tests. All the components are DR tested at the same time, and on the right hand side we see a selected set of three critical components that are being tested in isolation in DR tests. The two main reasons for using component DR tests in your case would be meeting lower recovery time and recovery point objectives. So if your RTOs and RPOs are in days, you should be probably fine with just using the standard approach of full-scale DR tests. However, if you want to get down to minutes or seconds, it's pretty much impossible to do it without critical component, isolated component tests. So one way of thinking about how your DR testing should be implemented is looking at a pyramid like this. So you start with your production failover tests, so full-scale testing. You add some other full-scope DR tests on top of that, and then you supplement that with selected critical component DR testing with service simulators. And this DR testing pyramid would look a bit differently once you get to RTOs and RPOs of minutes or seconds further down the line, because the component DR tests would be probably at the base of the pyramid. But when you're starting with this is a very good starting point to talk about with your team. Why would you do these component DR tests? They help you harden your IT infrastructure. So you can test how your applications will respond to failures. You can validate disaster recovery processes after various failure scenarios just for selected components. So it gives you more granularity on and more visibility on what specific components do in these complex failure scenarios. You can identify potential bottlenecks or vulnerabilities within the disaster recovery strategy on component level. It allows you to do work parallelization, so different teams will be working on DR tests in parallel along with also the main disaster recovery team. And it's also worth remembering that the people that know the most about what should be DR tested for a given system are the teams that actually work on those systems. So user onboarding team or financial transactions team, that team's gonna know the most probably which scenarios should be tested on a component level. So that's why the component tests are helpful. I also wanted to mention a few examples here of sample DR tests for your DR test managers. The actual list will depend on the critical components that you choose to component DR test and the business function that they perform and the IT architecture that you've got in place today. So please come and talk to us for more details of how our customers are testing these systems. But here are a few examples for your DR test managers. So sample real life scenarios for testing your components in isolation. For example, what you could test: what happens if a business site is unexpectedly down during a business transaction? Should we complete the transaction or fail and revert to our original original state in all dependent systems. And this is for a critical component, for example, imports and exports, a large sum, financial transactions. Another one, what happens if the text gateway or SMS gateway is not available? Should the component under test that we're testing stop processing of business transaction, or should it say, oh, I'm going to forget about the notifications to the users, but I'm still going to process the business transactions because they're making us money, etc., etc., etc. So I hope you can see there's a lot of granularity you can implement here in these component DR tests that will help you in these disaster scenarios. You could have some sample failover tests as well. For example, what happens when you're testing the failover in production, and you can test that on a component level as well and test the impact on the business transactions of those drop TCP connections. Again, if you've got transactions of $1 or $2 and not that many of them, and we're talking about financial transactions, maybe that's not a test you should be implementing. However, if you've got cross-border transactions that are in millions of dollars each, you want to make sure that they're not going to be corrupted during a failover scenario. So maybe you should be testing that on a component at a full-scale level as well. And some sample automated error case testing that you could implement on data-sensitive or cyber threat-prone partners and systems. For example, simulate hypothetical attacks at the back end of third-party data systems. So again, the actual list on these tests will depend on the components that you select, their business function, and the IT architecture you have in place. And feel free to get in touch with us for more details on that. So what would be the next steps, how we can start with this and start implementing component DR testing? Or the first thing should be a discussion with your DR team about embedding system simulation into your DR plan. So show them this presentation, for example. And the important thing to notice here is you don't have to boil the ocean. You can start with one system and one DR component test by picking the low-hanging fruit. A few things that we've noticed are worth asking yourself is which components are crucial to the business continuity, like which are the most, which system's downtime is the most impactful for you. Look at which systems cause the most problems during a DR drill test that you do probably once a year or once every few months already. Which components have had the highest rate of failures during unstable production environment conditions within the, let's say, last 12 months. You pick the low-hanging fruit like that, you implement the first test or a couple of tests, and then you can scale to more critical components. So yeah, thanks for watching. I hope this was useful, and feel free to reach out to us if you'd like us to help you accelerate and de-risk your testing plan. Thank you so much for watching again, and looking forward to hearing from you.